I'm really excited to bring up the next speaker, an Opticon veteran, newcomer to Developer Night, most importantly, Optimizely customer, Bill Hinderman from Datafiles.
Yes, look at that, it worked. As mentioned, I spoke here before. Quick recap on that. So I lead web and optimization at VividSeats, vividseats.com. And our team is responsible not only for the implementation of specifically Optimizely, but our testing program, but also sort of the procedures around it. So a lot of what I talked about last year was the political end of like getting an organization that was used to a lot of gut feel to think of more of a testing as default and over-optimization as much as you can mindset. And the thing is, it worked really well, and we got stuck in a spot where we were doing a lot of testing, which sounds good right until you realize you have like a lot of teams trying to like eke out that next conversion against one another. So what I'm going to try to fix is that in this talk, and specifically how we as technologists, as developers, can enable product teams and the business to think of testing as measuring long-term impact while not doing that at the detriment of individual conversion wins. So technically, I'm going to be talking about things like the Optimizely full-stack implementation we have, how we export data from raw data from Optimizely, how we've started to integrate this with our data warehouse and our service bus. Not exactly Kafka, not exactly SNS, but a similar sort of thing. So just to start, this is our tech stack. This is the monolith. That's full stack in it. Now, sort of what our system looks like is we have this sort of core set of services that we pull into all of our apps, and we sort of we leverage the benefits of having a monolith by putting our full stack implementation in that one choke point of where a lot of our core services are. So things like transactions, like orders that only go through one spot. And then additionally, we have some client-side ways that we reach out to the same data file, the same Optimizely project, so that we can, across all of our apps, do a lot with the same style of experimentation. And this was good. This worked for a lot of within Optimizely things, and it gave us, this is coming up in a bit, it gave us a lot of interesting challenges when we were just looking at testing as its own service. So things like handling Optimizely UID within full stack. This was a challenge that we approached when we were initially doing our implementation, and our initial thought was that we'll let Optimizely handle it. That's what they're doing, and it's obviously not really an option for us within full stack. We had to build something that matches our own tech stack. So that was gone. Maybe we could use session UID. Well, that's maybe 30 days, like at the maximum, and we have tests that could overlap that, like really problematically. So that's gone. Then we thought maybe an account. That won't change, but we're a marketplace, right? We sell tickets, and there's no real reason to stay logged in until the last second when you're going to buy something, so that's gone. So we had to go with something new. And that something new wasn't all that complicated. It was just a 5-year cookie that had a UUID in it. But it was meaningful, right? Because what we tied it to was the first session UUID that you ever got on our site, and those would change eventually. But we had now sort of the point in time where you first interacted with VividSeats. And so this was cookied, and this is how you would interact with Optimizely for the next 5 years. And using the same project gave us things like global events that we could track across not only web, but apps, so things like getting to checkout, getting through checkout, logging in, making an account, things that we were able to utilize globally and sort of start at step 5 instead of step 1 when we were running tests across all of our consumer-facing apps. But we got to this point where we were running a lot of tests in competition with one another. And as a business, over the past year, we've really started to look at how we can treat not only experimentation, but product development as a whole through the lens of looking at a customer's lifetime value and trying to extend that lifetime value instead of sort of just eking out that first conversion. So we had to do the same thing. Like we solved session, then we solved Optimizely, and now we had to solve how do we recognize a person across devices and across not just one session, but potentially years. So we had a lot of options again, and I wasn't going to cross them out individually, but they all didn't work again. So we had to do something new again. And this time we really didn't. We renamed it. So this becomes a really interesting piece of, I guess, technology, because it becomes a pivot point for a lot of our different UUIDs, right? So we can use this client UUID to tie to individual sessions, to any Optimizely test we've ever put someone into, an account, to a GA ID. We can use this as sort of the key to reach out to all the other keys. And so we start to include this client in our ecosystem for our sort of nascent event bus, where we're sending all of our internal analytics. And so I don't like putting code on a wall usually, because that's called a blog post. But these are just POJOs, so this is easy. So right, this is a client event that we send now from not only web, but from our apps, and it's straightforward, right? It has potentially a UUID, a user agent. It has the page type that you're coming through, so if you're at the home page, if you're at the end of checkout. But it also has that client ID. Another more meaningful client event is session creation. And you'll see that we push that Optimizely ID into it. So now, just by pushing this one ID into this one event, we can pull in all of our raw exported Optimizely data into our event bus and have that in our data warehouse forever and ever. So like this unlocked all that just by starting to add this data into our event bus. And so we have things like that push from the server instead, like a transaction goes through that monolith at the core of our system. And you'll notice we don't have that UUID in here anymore because we don't need it. We've at one point tied this to the client ID, and we can grab an order from over here and some Optimizely test from 5 years ago over there, and like we can get all this data without having to send it all the time. So it stays really efficient, stays really small, and these are like idempotent, tiny, replayable events that we can reuse across our system forever and ever. So let's actually go into that example. Let's go for the past week. We ran a test. We started it about a week ago. We had one user bucket into a variant. We tracked a few events with an Optimizely, but right, just looking at this user, they didn't convert. And let's say we were trying to change conversion. It didn't work. We added some more stuff. There were some web hits. Cool. Like this just verifies that everything's working. We had a session start on the first web hit. We created an account. We had a web login. Nothing really meaningful still yet. We're making sure that things work. But let's say at that same time we had these app hits that we can't connect to the same user until we can. We have a session start, so we have 2 sessions. We have a login. And let's say that login happened to the same user. So we now know that we had the same account ID. And this changes, because let's say there's a transaction then. We now started with only 1 user. And then we had 2 users that we didn't know anything about. And then 1 logged in. So we had 2 users, 1 logged in. But then the other logged in. And from here on out, and like not just within this time frame, but forever, we'll always know that these 2 client IDs and these 2 Optimizely IDs are the same user. And that means that for the length of time that we ever work with this user, we can tell what test they were in. And like on a huge timeline where we have a lot of tests and a lot of clients, this changes more too, because we could have all these clients, and let's see, these pink dots are sessions where they're coming to the site, coming to the app, and green is when they've logged in. And over the course of the year, there's a lot of tests that they learn, right? There's a lot of things that we could be putting users in or like having them skip completely. But if we look at this, like clients 2, 3, 4, throughout the year, we know that those are the same person. And we can start to build this really holistic view of not only the tests that people were in that affected them that day, but how we can start to create more complex and more robust cohorts for users moving forward. So someone that was in this style of test crosses, what that means. And it also means that we could find out, like, we actually pushed 2 transactions for the people in these test groups. So consuming really quickly, how we handle this, we have consumers off of that event bus. The data warehouse just eats up a lot of that, and then we have other apps that could use whatever they want. So the warehouse really just stores these keys to pull things from different databases. I already mentioned the events should be idempotent, which is a great word to try to spell, and replayable. And what's interesting here is that not only storing this in data warehouse, we can start to think of how other teams can use this data. So things like, if we're testing different sorting algorithms for events, our marketing teams could start to use that. Really, we can start to dog food this and say we're creating these new cohorts from the crosses of X type of events that people have seen on app and web at the same time, and get a lot more robust with how we're looking at tests, both in the short and long term. So ultimately, like, what we need is a system that is hyper analytical and way over communicative. That's all I got. Thanks. I was more wordy. I have 40 seconds.
Hi.
Hi.
So, is the client ID and optimize the ID, is that stored in a cookie?
Those are both cookies. Yeah.
In which case, if they haven't logged in, how would you know that it's
Yeah, that
them?
is the pivot point, right? That is how we know definitely that they're the same person, but we've also, so there were a couple things in there that I sort of breezed past, but we have email targeting IDs. We can attempt to find, like based on GA IDs, if we have things from other sites, we could potentially like work with a third party that tries to combine those people. So what we've started with is account and definitely email tracking, but this is, again, this is like the jumping off point for just being able to show or throw more and more data into that same spot that allows us to pull in the suite of tests that a user's been in. Okay, bye.